Once again, if you can just let us know when it is live.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate, the stream will be on for the rest of the speeches, unless someone says otherwise or changes their mind.
To double check with OG, are you okay to offer POIs on a stream?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay, cool.
Okay, great. Let me check on the stream. Thank you everyone for your patience. All right, you are streaming, so we're good.
Brilliant. I'd like to welcome the leader or deputy leader of opposition. Here.
Okay, I assume I can be heard. I see a little green square around me. I see Lucy putting up a finger. I hear my dog barking. Cool. Starting in 3, 2. Sorry, I have an ash in my eye. I'm sorry. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, on why this works. Not only is this talking about a lot of people by OG's own concession that this is going to be extremely that is going to talk about a larger number of people, but also universities are know that mainstream media do cover this. Similar to the Rose Must Fail campaign, they get called out as racist, they get called out as exclusionary. Their target group of recruitment is increasingly progressive youth. OG started their speech by saying this, right? This means that they lose recruitment and reputation as opposed to other unis, right? At the point where they do not do this, right? So this is a mechanism for why they change their practices as well, why they change their admissions, their staff representation, why they have an inherent incentive to be seen as good and to be seen as polite and inclusionary, right? So when OG say, oh, Jordan Peterson has views that are not about gender. Yeah, yes, but he's not getting deplatformed for his other views. He's being deplatformed because his mode of communication of these particular issues is if you openly accepted to literally deny people's existence, he would be quite fine. I'm sorry, my dog is really freaking out. Can you go check? Sorry. He's told he would if he did not literally deny people's existence by people's identity by not being helpful by refusing to engage with their preferred way of expressing themselves, with identifying with themselves, he would be fine. This means that it is not the right and conservative views that are being shut down. It is the way that they want to communicate them. Cool. The utility of stopping him from doing this, from expressing himself the way that he wants to, rather than the way that makes people feel better, is bigger than the disutility of him not speaking. When they say, oh, people on the top of these movements are going to be radical, it's unclear what radical means in this context. It's people most dedicated to the protection of minority groups. This just strengthens our mechanism on how this creates safe spaces for minorities, because there are people who are willing to fight for them. And to expand on our point of efficiency, on why this works, and not only is it a lot of people, on the developing world, we have to talk about that environments where there is no external pressure for governments or general society to cut down on minority discrimination or misrepresentation. This needs and can only happen organically through internal movements. On the point of the radicalization of the right wing, they never clear why this is the tipping point. These people are already in society. They already believe in things going the wrong way, and they already feel a need to fight it. It's unclear why universities doing this is going to be the tipping point that is going to radicalize the right wing, and why this is going to have societal effects that are extremely bad. Furthermore, it's not being about push to the underground. They literally still have YouTube channels, they have news outlets, they appear in interviews and in mainstream media, meaning that the comparative here is not if the right wing is going to exist generally and if conservative voices are going to exist generally. The comparative is making people in uni feel more comfortable, which we think is a greater utility than the disutility of some conservative voices not being able to be heard at any point in time on any place. Cool. Moving on. To their point about when they started the speech and saying, oh, this is about overcompensation, right? People are going to overcompensate rather than undercompensate. Firstly, it's unclear why do we care if they overcompensate rather than undercompensate. But secondly, we have shown why this is fine, and we would be willing to bite that bullet even if they had proven this. Because overcompensation means that that we're going to be on the safe side of people feeling a tie to their identity by the way that they are expressed, they are talked to, rather than some people not being able to express themselves in the same way they want to, right? Meaning that you have a greater tie and a more proximate relationship with your identity, and therefore the way that people frame your identity which represents it in society, than a certain person has with the way that they express their ideas and ideals, right? Cool. On the points of impacts, right? When they say, oh, you underprepare students for the real world. Firstly, they never explain why university is the place to prepare students for the real world if the real world is discrimination. Secondly, they never explain why it's bad to underprepare students for discrimination, because they didn't come here to be offended and to be prepared for casual discrimination in the workplace, but rather to specialize in their respective fields. This is the priority and the primary need of a university, right? Consider that they also probably engage with this on a day-to-day basis. They likely prefer a space where they can only focus on specialization and perfecting their craft, rather than having to deal with outside forces that are already problematic to them, because a trans person has faced discrimination day in and day out. They know how to deal with it. They don't want to deal with it in university. When they talk about, oh, conservatives feel less welcome, right? Comparatively, this is less important than left students feeling unwelcome, because they tie their identity to their pronouns, to their race, and to their gender identity more than the right-wingers do to their ability to say whatever they want, whenever they want, in whatever way they want. On the point of opt-in or versus opt-out, right? Cool. All want to mitigate our point by saying, oh, you can opt, you don't necessarily have to opt out, you cannot go in these go to these talks. This is factually untrue, and this really enforces their points. It takes us over OG the point that you cannot opt out when you are a student who is of a minority, of a group that is being discriminated against. Because when my professor misgenders me in class, when he laughs at me for wearing pink, when I'm sad because of failing an exam, and I'm crying in the corridors, he says, come on, be a man about it. These are times when I cannot opt out. I am regretfully placed in a cycle of perpetuation of something that is denying me my own right to access my own identity. Before I go on, I'll take closing. Opening.
The people who are most afraid of their identity being attacked literally can just not go, but I also don't know why the harms of your professor misgendering you has anything to do with the speaker coming. Harmful ideas exist on either side.
Harmful ideas do exist on either side. The way the question is who is exposed to them, and it's not the harmful ideas, the way that we frame our ideas. And secondly, are you saying, oh, if you're trans, just don't go to uni and you'll be fine? That's a weird argument. Moving on. Okay, when they say it's okay, when they say it's okay to infringe on any sport to speech, they're saying their argument is basically, oh, the president opens the door for anything. This argument is totally false. They themselves frame unis are left, meaning that both their harms to conservatives are self-mitigated, considering that most of the people by their own consensus here are going to be left. Secondly, the meaning they themselves show why it's unlikely this is going to exclude civil rights talk, or that it has in the past. Furthermore, this is not excluding conservative voices. Firstly, you're not kicked out on your first offense. You have a lot of leeway. Secondly, you can still express yourself by using gender-neutral language, not using questionable words, even if you don't agree they're questionable, but still having the ability to express your ideas. Meaning that this utility that OG brings is much larger than the utility we bring. This also answers the POIs by CG. What does it look like? This talks like talks public outcry. You can fuck up if people say this is bad, then discuss. For all these reasons, proud to propose.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the member of government here.
Cool. Can you hear me? Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I agree with OO. OG is marginal. The right wing, especially the far right, don't necessarily need one specific kind of deplatforming. By the way, Lucy, you're breaking up. Is it my net? Hello.
It's probably yours, but I'll turn off my video.
Is it my net, guys? I'm really sorry. For me,
Yeah.
Lucy got frozen.
Yeah. I'll just turn off my video.
Sadly, it's your internet that was cutting up. Yeah, Lucy was fine in mine. So
Okay, so I'm gonna turn off my video. But we can hear you. I'll let you know if we can't hear you, okay?
Okay, sure. All smooth now, guys?
Yeah, sounds good.
Sorry, I'll restart my speech. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I agree with OO. I do think OG is marginal. And the reason is because the far right don't necessarily need specific acts of deplatforming to use this vitriolic hate and call out the left for being elitist, because surely there are like a million other things through which they can fuel that rhetoric anyway. I agree with them that in some cases, specific minorities may be hurt. But even if we cater to this debate based on their own criteria, the only way in which we can ensure fairness and proper discourse that can eventually result in outcomes that protect minorities is when we allow these viewpoints to exist within these universities. Just a bit of clarification. I don't think universities generally want to, of course, this debate is not about real hate speech, and deplatforming of hate speech is it's not necessarily a tool of universities. Hate speech, especially when presented in public, is by nature, by legality, illegal. So it's not necessarily a debate about what is hate speech and what is not, but usually debates about whether or not we allow contrarian viewpoints, especially those of the conservative leaning ones, to be present in universities. Insofar as that is important, 4 broad areas in which I'd like to discuss. First, whether or not ensuring minority safe space is really hurt that much. In terms of mitigation, I think there are many safe spaces within universities that already exist for minorities that we can create even if they don't exist. These look like things like minority societies, such as Islamic societies all across the world, or celebrations of cultural days like Diwali in specific universities where you display culture, ask people of different communities to come and interact and understand what that minority culture is about. So on a primary level, I don't think there's no safe space that is present within these societies. Number 2, opting out. I do think that OG says that you can opt out of these talk shows or whatever this is if you choose to. But the more fundamental question that OG misses out on is the premise that OO assumes that minorities want to opt out. I posit that a vast majority of minorities don't want to opt out and want to go to these rallies. Why is this the case? The first is, no matter how much you try to shoulder yourself or hide yourself from this rhetoric, the reality is you won't be in your university forever, even during your university years and post facto that as well. Your interaction with real society means these viewpoints will be present in some form or another. Maybe it will be on social media, maybe it'll be videos that you see, maybe it'll be people you interact with in real life. But in a vast majority of those cases, the feeling that you will feel is a sense of powerlessness where you feel you can't do anything about the fact that these views exist. There are things that you see on a screen that you can only shout into a pillow about, but can't often interact with. That puts you in a cycle where when you see that others are not defending you within that community, you feel more hurt in that cycle. Even if you opt out of this process, society is just designed in a way in which you can't ever fully opt out. You can't choose every single interaction in your life. You can't decide what the internet ultimately shows you in specific cases. These individuals often want to go, challenge, and speak out against these individuals, even if it means they don't lead to a fruitful outcome, because that's a way in which they can vent for themselves and achieve catharsis for fighting for their identity. So the fundamental premise of OO itself is wrong. The third thing I'd like to posit is the trends through which you protect minorities will eventually evolve into a terrible trend. Notice Tin's POI answer. I asked him, who decides? They say majority people have to decide before deplatforming. But if you look at their analysis and their entire case, it's not dependent on majorities. The minorities hurt. They want to not only talk about minorities, but go intersectional. So it's not just one minority, it's a minority within a minority. So in principle, for you to protect the most vulnerable class, you need for those class to voice up and deplatform anything that hurts them. And that's the culture that we see today. The more vocal minorities, even though they're minorities, end up using their personal calculus to speak up and say that they're offended. Number 2, the moment one individual is deplatformed by virtue of catering to one intersectional minority, you have a culture of deplatforming where more minorities speak up and more platforms are more deplatforming happens. What this leads to is a culture of deplatforming where the trend shifts away from the 51% disagreeing that this is good to even 10 or 15% of people disagreeing that this is good. But thinking, but being more vocal about it. And for all the reasons Tin talks about, because of this culture of offense we create, we shun away these people from speaking. What this results in is a simple illustration of, say, a religious imam that wants to talk about why abortion should be banned, being deplatformed because it's an attack on the female identity of specific individuals. This ultimately hurts a different set of minorities, because those are minorities who might as well believe that abortion is something that we should not have. It's something that is akin to murder, but we genuinely remove from the discussion that happens. Why is that minority any morally inferior to the specific minority Tin wants to protect is a question that's left unanswered. We posit that you ought to err on the side of caution and just allow all views to exist as long as they don't violate legal norms, and then allow this discussion to happen. The fourth thing I'd like to talk about is why these discussions happen fruitfully in contrast to any other part of society. Before that, CEO.
So what's unclear to me is why the act of speaking up against these people is not in and of itself a norm and an idea that we can also have within this somewhat divergent and free space of thinking and acting.
Those are English words like, yeah, you can speak up when you platform them and they go and challenge, right? That's the way of speaking up. Okay, so the last thing I'd talk about is why these discussions happen fruitfully. And the reason is because minorities, based on OO's premise, live in a state of insecurity. So maybe they feel hurt when these discussions happen poorly. There are three reasons why these discussions, when they happen in universities, happen more fruitfully. Number one, you have control of the platform. This looks like you deciding who the moderator is. So the conclusions and narratives around the discussion can be drawn by the university itself, not by an external party on Fox News. Number two, what time slots are allocated to specific individuals, who gets what time, is dependent on you. Number three, the questions that are rejected and accepted, maybe in a different platform where you don't have the control. Some questions where you directly challenge the viewpoint get rejected because Fox News is in charge. Here, you're in charge. Number two, the nature of the challenge itself. When university students and academicians challenge, every fact that Jordan Peterson spews out can be instantaneously challenged with logic and counter facts. This is unlikely to be present in a rally where most of these people are uneducated. Number three, the ability for contrarians to speak up. You won't go to a Trump rally as a liberal because you're afraid of what that means. Here you get more of a safe space to put out your viewpoint. This is the only part of society where this direct challenge of that viewpoint can happen on such a profound scale. Nothing else allows this amount of discourse to happen. We need to ensure that their views are challenged by those who can challenge them. That's the only way minorities feel protected. Based on all criteria, we win.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the member of opposition. Hear, hear.
Hello, am I audible?
You are.
All right, hold on. I'll just fix my camera. One moment. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the flaw of opening opposition is they do not explain the nuance of a university platform. At best, they say universities should be safe spaces, but opening government and closing government are correct in saying that the people around you could still believe the stuff that you don't want to be able to hear. You could often opt out in the instance that you don't feel comfortable with these beliefs, or the fact that there are so many other platforms for these speakers to go on and become influential. What we'll do in closing opposition is explain why uniquely a university platform changes the way that speech is interpreted and how people are able to perceive these speakers as a consequence of them feeling the legitimacy of being an Oxford Union or Cambridge Union speaker, or whichever else university you want to be a part of. There are two main rebuttals I want to go on to be able to ensure that my speech is going to have very solid logic. The first is that it's not true that they're going to just allow any kind of right-wing or conservative thought to be banned. In fact, I'd argue that the worst speakers are likely the ones to be deplatformed and not anybody else. Not just because you need the consensus from everybody, but firstly, that it's least likely for administrators within the university, who are often the ones making these decisions, to want to negotiate with the same radical or irrational people that opening government says will be the norm and will have the most power. In fact, I'd argue they have an active incentive to work with the people who are most moderate. And if these people think that these speakers are too radical, too extreme, they are not likely to let them in. But secondly, it's a personal cost for anyone to want to speak up and actively deplatform anyone. That means that they would have had to actively be an affront to your own identity and who you are as a person for you to want to mobilize and collectivize against them speaking. That means, therefore, it's not likely just any kind of conservative speaker. But now I want to move on to closing government, who says minorities are going to want to do this. This is a broad generalization of minorities that I think is unfair. The first thing I want to note is that if they ever wanted to do this, and a significant number of them wanted to, it's unclear why the push to the platform would have happened to begin with. But the second thing I want to note is that the people who would have wanted to speak out, who wanted to confront their oppressors, are likely people who are the most comfortable with being able to do so, who might not feel that same amount of trauma by facing the same person who denies their identity. And therefore, this is not the most vulnerable group you ought cater to. I don't think the closing government extensions generalization is going to win in this debate. How then does this change speech? I want to note the nature of the academic institution, because the academic body prides itself in knowledge that is factually and historically based. Note that this isn't true for a lot of the inflammatory speech that I mentioned, because instead of it coming from history, instead of it coming from facts, it is often rooted in anger and hatred towards specific groups. It is often rooted in a lack of understanding of someone's lived experiences, which is why a lot of these speakers end up becoming white males who have no idea what it's like to be trans, who have no idea what it's like, and say there is no gender wage gap. But moreover, they come from misinformed and unfounded assertions about the world. What does the university platform do? It affects three things. Firstly, for the ideas that these people espouse, it allows people to perceive that the person who is now denying gender-based discrimination is just as legitimate as the professor who came in last week explaining the history of Black oppression in America and why reparations are needed to make up for slavery. It is this equality that this platform is able to provide, and makes it seem like someone who had put together years of their scholarly work within an hour is just as legitimate a speaker as someone who is coming in with that kind of inflammatory speech. But secondly, for the person themselves, it is the ability to call themselves intellectuals. And note that a lot of these people were YouTube speakers, were conspiracy theorists, and were not known for these things. But now when they can say Cambridge or Oxford Union speaker within their CV, it comes across as them being people who are thinkers, and therefore gives a lot of legitimacy to the future speech they're able to espouse as well. Manny Pacquiao, who is a senator in the Philippines, was invited to the Oxford Union and now claimed himself to be very smart, despite having an active anti-LGBT track record and saying that these people are animals, which is absolutely disgusting. But thirdly, you don't just deplatform people on the basis of thought and belief. You deplatform them on the basis of their own conduct. Which is why Milo Yiannopoulos was not just deplatformed for being racist, he's an active child predator. And I'd note that this is an incredibly important tool, particularly in the era of Me Too, where a lot of the people who will speak on gender-based discrimination are also guilty of incredibly dangerous and sexual misconduct themselves. There are three conclusions I want to be able to make. First, you shift the speech that could have otherwise been fringe, that could have otherwise not had the legitimacy of a university, to ones that now deserve legitimate political thought, ones that seem just as factual as what the left is espousing. But number two, you can move them on to other platforms, because as opening government says, these are important and powerful platforms. That is why they can now go on to the news, because they were just in Oxford or Cambridge last week. And I'd note that this movement was coupled with significant deplatforming on Twitter of Donald Trump, significant deplatforming in many other areas. And I'd note that if government says these people are crybabies who need to adjust to the real world, I disagree. I'd say the real world has to start adjusting, and this is an important step in giving this kind of move legitimacy in other areas to make people more safe, achieving OO's benefit better than they do. But thirdly, it also makes people who are university educated and intellectual feel more comfortable in believing things that would have otherwise not been within their range, because these things are not factually true or factually founded. I think that is dangerous as a consequence. But lastly, it is the ability to say that your own personal beliefs are just so detached from your own personal conduct, and therefore giving a platform to a lot of awful people who have smart ideas, that I'd say gives more legitimacy to excusing personal behavior, even if it just because these people are quite smart and intelligent or charismatic themselves. Before I move on, I'll take a PY from OG.
Please engage with,
Yeah.
please engage with the analysis. Why
No,
the
no, no, no. Let me read it. These dipshits get more legitimacy on your side because they look like big brain men that the best of the left is too scared to engage with because they're scared of facts and logic. I think they're more likely to be empowered on your side when they look like fucking
Right.
wimps.
Gotcha. So second extension is on engagement, why it's worse. So first is they have legitimate discussion as closing government and opening government say. The first thing I want to note is that if the moderator, the conditions of the speaking are going to be beneficial to the students, I don't know why the speaker will agree to be able to speak to begin with. I don't think the CG context is likely. They will pull out if they feel like they're on the losing end of an argument. But note that they're often on the winning end if they were engaging, because these people are known for their charisma. So there are a lot of smart students who can factually and logically rebut these people, but may not have the same articulate ability and appeal to emotion these speakers will have. But secondly, for the same reason CG says, this could be a traumatic experience, such that you might know exactly what you want to say until you're about to say it for a lot of these people who have been spoken to and degraded in the context of a public forum, such that it's not likely you're going to be disproven by the left. This is going to go on a reel of Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro owns the libs once more. Look at how he responds to this black student again, and therefore further disengaging the benefit from opening government. But secondly, they say you could protest, you can do other things, you can make noise and be rowdy. I would say deplatforming to begin with avoids a lot of the more radical action that will make the left seem much more irrational. If these are the things OG wants to say, like people protesting outside of the space rather than actually engaging, people being able to make noise and disrupting the nature of the forum, that is going to make them look more irrational. And therefore, whether you choose a legitimate discussion or other forms of action to act against these kind of platforming, it is much worse for the perceptions to the left. For these reasons, we're the most nuanced team. We beg to oppose.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the proposition whip here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Thank you so much. I'm just making it clear before my speech that the views in the speech are on the needs of the motion rather than personal views, but that's just true for any form of competitive debating, I guess. All right. I'll start with CO, then engage OO, and then compare with OG and why we win the debate. First on CO, I think CO does do a lot of nuance that they claim, but I'm going to show you why they're essentially wrong in a lot of cases. First of all, the idea that only the worst of speakers are are the ones that are likely to be deplatformed. This is spectacularly untrue. Firstly, because Sajid has already explained to you why the trend of being offended is something that increases day by day. And this is something that is factually correct, right? The trend of being offended, the threshold of being offended gets lower every time you disinvite someone that you don't agree with, because some other loud community within the campus gets the ability to say that we would be offended by this speaker and therefore this speaker should be platformed, because that becomes the only criteria through which you judge whether or not an individual should be invited. So the criteria of offense gets lower and means that it's not just the worst of individuals. But two, this is also true like factually, right? To the extent to which these are not individuals who are always conspiracy theorists and so on and so forth, but rather these are individuals who are like people such as Jordan Peterson, who, yes, a lot of people may hate, but is also a university professor at the same time as well. People such as Bill Maher, who's a very prominent comedian, has a lot of following and so on and so forth, and has been historically progressive, but also is like banned from the Berkeley campus, for example. So these are not always individuals who are the worst of speakers. But more importantly, thirdly, it is important to note that when someone gets invited to speak within a university, they're usually invited by another university group, or at least individuals who are affiliated with that university. They don't ask to come to that university. They're usually like invited from within the university for a particular purpose. Means that they have some legitimacy within individuals who are trying to get tertiary education and it's like studying for tertiary education and so on and so forth. Means that these are not likely to be the worst of individuals. Then they say, but giving them legitimacy, giving conspiracy theories legitimacy and so on and so forth is something that is wrong. However, I'd like to posit to you this, right? If the opposition is talking about universities that have humongous amounts of progressive political capital so as to be able to deplatform individuals, clearly the way in which they will be platformed is different from the way in which someone else will be platformed. For example, when you invite Ben Shapiro to speak on Harvard, they're not going to get the same platform that Judith Butler gets. Judith Butler walks into Harvard as a celebrity, whereas Ben Shapiro is probably brought onto that for a debate. There's a huge distinction, a huge difference between the way in which speakers are treated in a progressively leaning university, the universities that are likely to do this. And universities have all the capital in the world to be able to frame, advertise, and promote the way in which they engage with these speakers and so on and so forth. At that point in time, if they have the political capital to deplatform them, surely we have the political capital to be able to say that no, these certain views of these individuals are problematic and so on and so forth. To this, their response is, oh, but if you don't create a conducive environment for these speakers, why will they even come? Why? Because, oh my God, right-wing individuals or right-wing prominent thinkers literally market themselves as harbingers of free speech and market themselves as, oh, we never back down from a challenge from debates from the progressives. It's the progressives that are afraid of us in a lot of circumstances. So you will never see Ben Shapiro backing down from a university, from an interview in CNN. And that always happens. Like Ben Shapiro always shows up to any interview that you invite him, regardless of CNN, BBC, any other progressive platform, MSNBC, you name it. Ben Shapiro has been in all of them because their whole identity, their whole aura is constructed off of the ability to engage and be able to debate against the progressives and still come out on top. That is essentially the way in which they market themselves, which means that regardless of how we place them within our campuses, regardless of how we frame them in a way in which maybe we want to have them have a debate with like Ben Shapiro versus someone who is like a trans activist and have a fruitful engagement in that, we're able to do so and we're able to make them come to it because their whole aura depends on it. Before I move on to OO, I'll take a POI from them.
Even if minorities want to go to challenge these things, it's unclear why it has to be in uni. When public debates, call into TV debates, social media discussions where these people respond exist. If conservatives want to listen to this, they can go to their YouTube channels. The comparative is the people who want to opt out but cannot. That's the delta of this debate.
Amazing. The reason why minorities need university campuses, because as I said, university campuses are massively progressive leaning because obviously they have the ability to deplatform them, meaning that the university campuses are likely to be able to provide them the ability to be able to challenge them. Look at the sort of characterization that opening opposition provides towards these minorities. These minorities probably came from conservative societies. They were always oppressed. They were always not able to speak up. Means that these individuals, I'm not saying all of them, we are saying a significant number of them want to be able to engage with them in a context in which they feel comfortable. Because it's one thing trying to challenge Ben Shapiro in an open arena where most of them are Ben Shapiro fans versus trying to challenge them in a university campus where most of them disagree with Ben Shapiro. You feel a different kind of empowerment when you're trying to engage to them. We recognize that, yes, there are individuals who still may feel attacked. But the way in which we present Ben Shapiro within this campus is able to mitigate a lot of these harms because we are just not going to highlight and say that, oh, Ben Shapiro is coming, this is a cause for celebration. It is not a cause for celebration. If anything, we probably celebrate the sort of debate and discourse that we have, but we never celebrate the speaker because if a university campus would previously deplatform them, they would probably not celebrate them. That is where it happens. But here's the thing that is very important in this particular case, right? And I think this is something that opening opposition and closing opposition does not just engage to. When you look at Sajid's piece, when there is a trend of being offended and the threshold being lowering, there is a way in which you lose out on the ability to engage to individuals who are, say, moderately conservative, who are probably parents of new generations, who may even have the ability to change their minds. The reason why university campuses act as a very good way of convincing these individuals is because university campuses allow them to come out of their bubble. A bubble that is constructed by algorithms in YouTube and the fact that they always watch Fox News means that they will probably never click on a video without that video containing Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson in them. But the point at which they click on a video when it's Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, maybe in Oxford Union, Cambridge Union, Harvard Union, whatever it is, then they're able to be exposed to what the counter arguments to whatever they're saying is. This is a unique ability that is only possible through universities engaging in this particular forms of this discourse, because universities have charismatic speakers, academicians who are able to engage to this and have a fruitful discussion, which, by the way, is then maybe able to, even if we show that maybe 2 or 3 parents change their minds slightly about their trans kids, that is way more valuable to this debate than someone who wants to opt out of going to that discourse because someone has already found their safe space within university, but that kid who is suffering within a conservative household with individuals who are anti-transparent need a way out of it. And if their parents are even moderated slightly, that is a bigger benefit to the debate than it is to protect individuals who are already within mostly a safe space. Incredibly proud to propose.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and to close this debate and the in-rounds as a whole, I welcome the opposition whip. Hear, hear.
Hi, can I be heard?
You can, yeah.
Wait, I think I actually just got. Sorry, I think I somehow muted myself. Can I be heard now? Okay.
Yep, all good.
Just give me a second to set up my timer. Okay. So something happened while I was setting up my timer. I've accidentally broken my mic stand, so I will just hold my mic like kind of a weirdo. Please don't judge me too much for it. See, yeah, it's in a unfortunate. Anyway, I'll take POIs in chat. Maybe, I mean, I don't know, this or physical, maybe if you got me in a bar, but not now. Great. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two things in the speech. First, why government is out, and then secondly, why we overtake opening opposition. First, let's take down closing government's responses to us, because they have some responses, but they don't actually tackle the meat of our case. The first thing they say is that we only get the worst speakers. That's raw. So, and then they rebut it. What the proof for it is that the trend of being offended gets lower day by day. First, analytically, I actually don't know why this happens. Like, there's no reason for why the trend gets worse. They just prove that the trend continues, which is not sufficient to prove that the trend increases over time. Beyond that, we also give points for why the trend is likely to be somewhat self-moderating for the backlash reasons you give. There's a natural counterincentive to do it too much if there's a fear of backlash from the other side. Moreover, government bench just thinks if a bunch of people just become loud enough, they can deplatform anyone, versus our more unique analysis about who decides who gets to go in, which analyzes the incentives of university administrators who are most likely to work with the most moderate groups where there's most consensus, and they don't want to look weak and just let any group of students push them around. This is why our material is analytically prior. So even if they have some material that rebuts like some suggestions of our case, it doesn't actually tackle the actual meat of the point that the majority of speakers that do get kicked out are the ones that are the worst. The fact that they say the fact that they get invited means that they are not the worst. I mean, everyone in this round is giving examples of terrible speakers that still get invited for one reason or another. It seems like just the fact that they get invited is not sufficient to prove as a test for that the fact that they are a good person or a bad person. It seems to me that in fact there may be many independent student groups that invite bad speakers too. So it's not clear to me that this is true. So on this first point then, it is clear that the majority of the contexts we are engaging with are not the ones that closing government is talking about. But even if it were, and this is the second point of engagement that we do to take them down, is we illustrate that speakers do get intellectualized. Their first response to us is to say, Ben Shapiro comes on for a debate. It's very different from being seen as a speaker. One, why would they get, like, again, many of these speaking engagements are seen as speeches, not as debates. There's like, I mean, Manny Pacquiao was brought on for a debate. He wasn't brought up, but was brought on for a speech, not brought on for a debate. But secondly, many of the characteristics we identify that ensconce someone in power as a position of someone with authority, as a position of someone being seen with intellectual legitimacy, even if they are in a debate, still gives them a fair amount of power, especially when they're seen on a YouTube video with the label of the Cambridge Union or the Oxford Union attached to it. Beyond that, then they say, but actually, the university will have a lot of control to make things look good. This is where this substantially flips the likelihood of this point, because any opportunity that these people will have to say they were cheated on Fox News when they were talking about how the debate went, any rebuttal that the discussion itself lends credence to the left loses weight, because they're able to provide proof that they are being brought on and then being subsequently silenced by the moderator and being given asked loaded questions, for example. This is when you get all these YouTube comments about people saying the interviewer was super biased and how the left is actually refusing to intellectually engage, as opposed to just saying that these people are like being, so it's at minimum the same harm that they point out. But beyond that, this also fails to engage with the rest of Mika's material on this point that has substantial amount of ground in the benefits of this debate. That is to say, dealing with the fact that the intellectualization of these speakers has a gigantic and outsized effect on the actual legitimacy they have in wider society, and provides a transition for like smaller, like more alt-right speakers, more like radical but also smaller speakers, to be able to transition to more mainstream methods of communication to other people. So we actually genuinely point out why this creates an outsized effect on society that I'll use later to take down opening opposition, but is currently sufficient to beat government bench as a whole. Finally, they then say people want to engage with them. Minorities want to engage with these people in an arena that makes them feel comfortable. The first thing I will dispute is whether or not this is an arena that makes them feel comfortable. We pointed out that the act of speaking may not lead to catharsis because this may lead to you being intellectually dominated and there's no actual response or material. Their only response is saying, well, engaging with like in the Trump rally is worse. Yes, so you're not going to go to a Trump rally. You'll go to like a more neutral venue if you really want to, or you'll go to a discussion on a YouTube video. You don't have to do it specifically there. But beyond that, we also pointed out that participating in the act of protesting can also lead to a form of catharsis, especially if you are still repudiating these points in public and you are still protesting these things. So it's not genuinely clear to me why the act of catharsis itself is one, marginal, and two, important. So finally, why do we take it over opening opposition? But before that, I'll take a POI from opening government.
Please engage with our three mechs for why the most radical and irrational voices are likely to rise to the top and also race to the bottom, and why this backlash against academia and the left is unique. On either side, minorities' identities are attacked on social media. It's hard to opt out when you see it on your timeline. The only difference is that the only chance to fight and engage with those viewpoints are on our side, not yours.
Our engagement is our argument, and our argument is that this is not sufficient of a threshold to overcome the people who actually decide who will prioritize moderates, as we said, right? So the fact that some people speak louder doesn't mean that they'll be the only ones heard. And beyond that, there's some vivid discussion about other people who are equally repudiated by it and will speak against them. So it's not clear to me why in this vigorous discussion, why only people of one side will be considered. Having said that, why does CO take it over opening opposition? We take it in two key ways. The first is mechanistically, which is that OO assumes these speakers are bad for one reason or another, and that leads to alienation. And what we illustrate is the characteristics of these speakers that are most likely to get them deplatformed are also the ones that lead them to alienation, namely charisma, namely emotional vigor, and namely their tendency to alienate people for the sake of drumming up attention or incendiary rhetoric. And note, CG's point in saying some hate speech is illegal is not enough. The first fact is that sadly in many countries hate speech is not illegal, but secondly is that there are many things that are towing the line that are currently quite disputed, that are not presently illegal, but can still cause massive emotional damage to a person's ability to feel free and safe in a society. Speaking out against trans people's rights and identity is not illegal, and people still do it today. The fact that you say it's illegal in all countries is simply not a response. But secondly, we also take it over opening opposition on a level of scale and a level of gravity in terms of the outcomes provided, where I think what we specifically provide is, first of all, a very good flip for the reason for why they get substantially worse outcomes for the left, presuming that's an important outcome, because the fact that participating in the act leads you to getting more likely to be intellectually dominated, and as direct proof that you are actually worse in an argument, and the fact that these people are substantially more intelligent than you. So these are all reasons that provide for the transition of these people to become outsized personalities and voices in the creation of the intellectual dark web. We actually think that many of these universities were the main contributors to the creation of that intellectual dark web, which is a debate buzzword that was used quite often in like last year, and now you're using it again in this round. So, but moreover, on the second level of metric for why this is an outsized influence, it's not just because this affects people within these universities, which we agree to be somewhat true, but this also substantially affects the discourse that happens in people's everyday, like in day-to-day lives, and just all over the world, in other people's houses and other people's places, because the fact that these people are legitimized to be intelligent, which means that their arguments, their radical thoughts, and their beliefs gain substantially more intellectual weight when it comes to the discussions that people have in the present day, but also the influence that they have in other ways in the future, such as politicians, such as mainstream political discussion that they then get inserted into because of the fact that they are broadly more legitimized. It was the fact that these people were put on as academic fellows, were seen to be as legitimate, and were given intellectual currency to be able to speak over other people because they were platformed. Remember, the specific nuance of closing opposition is that the act of a platform, of a university platform, lends power that should be carefully moderated, and the fact that we are putting more fetters on it is a good thing, because the fact it is a careful power we must be giving out and affording and awarding somewhat restrictively. At the end of this speech, it is quite clear. Closing opposition takes the dub. Thanks.
Cool. I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and indeed all of you for that debate. If the streaming could stop, that would be great. This is a